What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in its crosshairs. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Duke of Sussex. Or is it just Harry now? The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from the latest UK employment rate to what a government reorganisation might mean for each Department of State. And of course, the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, the former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Bob White, Chairman of Rise Management Consulting. In the wake of the financial crash, Rise was created. 9 years later, the company has gone from strength to strength, even with the new challenges that have emerged. They have grown both at home and abroad. Bob has spent over 30 years in the industry, working on a variety of major projects over those years. We discuss the journey Rise has been on over the last decade, the sector more generally, and their plans for the future. Bob, welcome.
Hi. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And thank you, most importantly, Bob, for taking the time to come on today. And I thought it would be a good place to start. I know it's been a number of months since, obviously, Rise has been in the review. I think the listeners would love to know how business is.
Yeah, it's okay. It was quieter at the end of the year than perhaps we anticipated, but not surprised because of the threat of the Brexit hanging over us and all that might mean. We were concerned a little bit in our business because we work quite a little bit, a reasonable amount in Europe. And we, in particular, we were concerned about the movement of people and how that might in some way be restricted. We know no more about that now. All we do know, of course, is that we're on the way to exit, and the quicker the better, according to the Prime Minister.
Well, absolutely, and I'm glad you said the B word before I did, and perhaps we'll certainly be talking about it in a little bit more detail later. But I know, in case, in fact, a lot of listeners might not know, Rise Management Consulting was, in fact, founded very shortly after the financial crisis in 2011. Now, working predominantly in property and construction, I assume you must like a challenge. What were some of those early challenges for the business? I imagine there were quite a few of them.
I've been involved in starting two particular businesses, and both of them we started sometime more or less in the middle or towards the end of a recession, and we don't find that too much of a problem. It has some advantages as much as it teaches you to be frugal, not too adventurous too early, and to watch the financial side of the business as much as the actual operational side of the business. And those things are all very useful, I think, when you start in a business.
Without a doubt. And obviously, since then, it's gone from strength to strength. 9 years old, it'll be this year. What have been some of the more, and maybe just talking domestically for the moment, what have been some of the more interesting projects you've got to work on?
Domestically, by far probably the Opera House, Opera House in Covent Garden, which is not only an important job to work on and had a really understanding client, and the trustees of the Opera House are well known to us in terms of their knowledge of the industry. So it was a well-rounded project in that sense. People knew what they were talking about and knew what they expected, etc., which isn't often the case with clients, of course. But the other part of it was an ideal construction management project. It turned out that way. It was there was an awful lot of constructability type of research and innovation and work with trade contractors, which all led to benefits to the client and to the project itself. So, and we had the right sort of size of team for that job. I won't tell you how much it was because the clients say that, but we had about at peak probably a 12 to 15 man or person team, and at times obviously as a start and finish less than that. And it was just a very good job with very good people. Our own team were excellent, and most of the people involved as other consultants were good too. So, yeah, an all-round very good job.
Fantastic. What a chance of a lifetime to be able to work on such an iconic building. And I imagine it would confronted some rather architecturally and structurally some unique challenges.
Yeah, some structural components of the work were very challenging. But probably the most overriding challenge was the fact that the Opera House wanted to stay open and active during the whole of the works. So we worked on that basis. We committed to doing that. And I think there was only once when there was I think there was rehearsal underway, and some noise was being made, and we were asked to change that. Only once did we drop the ball in that sense. But the rest of the time, it all worked perfectly well. And the evening performances, the matinees, the rehearsals, all went according to plan whilst we were doing our work.
Superb. And I mean, if not, I suppose you could always hope if you had to do any work during a performance, if it was a particularly heavy Wagner opera, you might be able to get away with it. But if not, if you're in a lot of trouble. Now, I only talked domestically just then because I know that, especially in the last few years, the business has, of course, expanded abroad, working on some exceptionally interesting things in some very interesting locations. Now, some of that, am I right in saying you looked at the move abroad in part because of Brexit? How has that leap gone? Clearly successful, but what were some of the difficulties and opportunities you've discovered in doing so?
Yeah, I think the first thing that should be said was that we did not intend necessarily to do lots of work overseas when we first started. Mm. I think it's something that grew into our minds more when the whole Brexit thing became visible and understandable, and we thought that there was going to be a time when we should make sure that we had perhaps a international office or an office overseas, which was part of the EU, and that would give us some sort of insight or ability to get involved in projects on a much wider basis. So that's how we really first started this stuff overseas. It's actually turned out remarkably well because we've got some great clients, and we work for some of the biggest clients in the world, like Apple and Amazon and others, for whom we actually do more consultancy work than building work, it's got to be said. And that suits our business. The remarkable thing about our business was it was established as a consultancy on purpose. And we want to do more consultancy. We want to do more work about advising how things should be done and how you actually get from A to B in the most suitable, economic and delightful way, actually enjoying the experience. And on all that, we have the right people in the business, or we managed to take on the right people in the business we knew out there to actually have that sort of attitude towards their clients and towards their work, and develop something slightly unusual in our sector, but there's a company who's more dedicated to delighting the client than actually just taking the money.
I guess exceptionally well put, Bob, and what who would have thought, 9 years ago that actually that the business would be so outward facing, as it were, and it has been exciting. And I know you've already brought it up, and it's something I think obviously worth talking about in a bit more detail. The last, and no matter what business you're in, but if you do any work in Europe, and indeed I know in your case as well, Bob, employing citizens from other European Union countries, the last 3 years, 4 this year, have been exceptionally difficult when it comes to uncertainty. No one knew what was going to happen. Whether we like the result or not, at the very least at the minute, we know we're going to leave. But as you've already pointed out, goodness knows what that does mean for immigration and visa systems. How do you hope this, and how do you see it, perhaps more importantly, panning out?
Difficult to say yet, I guess. I would assume that even some of our politicians don't exactly know how it's going to pan out, even though they're quite close to it. But I kind of hope that the common sense prevails, really. That, I mean, the reality about the EU in its birth days, I guess, was that it saw the benefit of transferring knowledge, of transferring some cultural aspects of people's different countries, of actually developing a family of countries who had some commonality, which enabled them to work much more easily together and to have more comfort being with each other. And now, if that was the case, and we can still retain some of that advantage by being good friends with Europe, despite actually not being sat around the table, then I think it will be fine. I'm not a person who believes we've got to be totally independent and in charge of everything we do ourselves and all that sort of stuff. I think as long as you're working in an open and democratic group of people, you will eventually get to some of the right decisions, and they'll be right for many people as opposed to just a limited few. And that's what I kind of hope we're going to get to. And so we don't feel threatened at the moment by the Brexit situation, but we're still obviously bathed in the wood. We don't actually know what the hell's going on yet. Yes,
that is the problem, isn't it? And although interestingly, I suppose with the election result last month, contrary perhaps to an instinctive feeling, a large Conservative majority may well mean it's far more likely to have a more liberal immigration system, because I
think that's absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think the worst possible case could have been a home parliament or something, and nothing ever got done. But at least we've got somebody in charge who's got the ability to make things happen, and that will be the measure of whether or not they succeed or not.
Absolutely. Whilst we could talk about this for the next 10 hours, I really don't think we should, Bob. So
I'll move on.
If I could ask you,
if I could just say one thing about what we've just been talking about for a few minutes, and that is, we as consultants, we try and sell the value of certainty to our clients. Not, we don't try and tell them anything other than not try and tell them we're going to make them a beautiful building. We don't try and tell them it's going to be much cheaper than that. But we do tell them that we should be able to do this in this time for this sort of cost, and it will give you those positive advantages as a client. Now, that level of certainty we need to be able to transfer to our clients in our business. And until we have a bit more certainty within the political environment, if I can call it that, and indeed a bit more certainty about how that's going to affect SMEs generally, we will not be in a position to be as certain as we could be.
I think you speak on behalf of so many millions when you say that, Bob. And with that in mind, actually, that brings us quite nicely onto this point. As you see it now, and I'll make sure you'll have to give a slightly different answer without Brexit, certainly. But as you see it, what would you say are the main challenges facing the sector for the next 18 months or so?
I think there is a shortage of skill in many areas now. I trained as an architect, for example, and I expected to do things as an architect which today's architects don't expect to do. It would seem to me they ask for an awful lot of consultants to work on their job. And one of the jobs we worked on, the architect was for a waterproofing consultant. Now, can I say, when I was designing buildings as a young man, I expected to be able to do that sort of stuff. And so I think that applies to consultants, and I think it applies to our own the people we engage with or we employ, people in our project management type of style business or cost consultants or whatever they may be in terms of professionals. Professional disciplines are also working our business at doing things.
No.
We need more skill. There's no doubt about it. And it's very noticeable that when I was a young construction manager, if you want to call me that, in the second half of the 80s, I was expected to know the cost of things on the hoof, more or less, a unit cost, as opposed to actually ringing somebody up and asking trade contractor what he thought the recent cost would be, blah, blah, blah. It was these sort of trade benefits or doing your job benefits you expected to have. So if a client said to you suddenly, well, if I did this instead, would that work? And how much would it cost me? You could actually give them an in-the-round sensible answer. That sort of stuff doesn't exist much anymore.
So it very much... Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry?
Go ahead, sorry. Go on. So it's very much something that needs to start with education. And given you do so much work abroad and in Europe, is it something that perhaps we could learn from others on that front? Are we getting it? Are we falling behind in terms of what skill sets our younger workforce has compared to others?
I'm not sure about that, to be quite frank. I mean, we haven't witnessed that because when we work, the few jobs we've worked on overseas with different consultants, we don't feel embarrassed by their quality or skill base, to be quite frank. In fact, in many ways, it may be more about attitude and skill. I think we are certainly more positive about getting things done than possibly that's true of some of the consultants in other countries.
Well, I'll tell you what then. I'll put you on the spot then. And maybe it's an unfair question. If you this afternoon you've become Secretary of State for 2 hours, you've been given a magic wand, what would you do, reforms or otherwise, that would introduce either to education, the sector more generally, that you think could really help the British industry take off in that sense?
Yeah. I'd integrate education more. I wouldn't segregate it as much as it is. A quantity surveyor, a project manager, a construction manager, even designers, architects, and others could all share some common learning. The level of specialization before you get into your job is relatively small, and is overstated in all our disciplines as something that's important, and it's not. The other thing is that perhaps we should do more day release type of education, more part-time education than actually sending people to universities all the time. University may be appropriate for some people who are doing different sorts of work, but certainly from our point of view, people who have been to day release or different, some form of part education, part work, are very competent people very quickly.
I think that's exceptionally important point, actually, Bob. And no matter, you can talk to a lot of people across different industries, in fact, and they couldn't agree more with you, I think, in regarding when especially younger generation arriving in jobs, and that they have already, as you put it, too specialising. There's the old quote, isn't there, that everyone's becoming better and better at less and less. And I think that is the crack. And I think we've got to move forward, especially perhaps post-Brexit, where we do need to become as competitive as possible. I think that's going to be something quite key, and you've hit the nail on the head there. I'm conscious of the time here, Bob, so we are going to have to come to a close, but if I could perhaps, and it might be appropriate now, what advice would you give young people looking to start a career in the sector and maybe even aspire to build a business that you've done yourself one day?
Interesting. I mean,
on the spot.
in a way, I would start by repeating what I just said in a way, because two of my children have both done distance learning, and one's got a very good degree, and one's about in her final year, and both are working. And that's done them no harm at all. They're well-adjusted people who get on well with people outside work, so to speak. They're normal human beings. I think that's one. I'd certainly encourage people to think about the benefits of one rather than the other. I would also think about making sure that you are very familiar with the outcome of what you're going to try and do. A lot of people I know, even in the good old days, even over many years of my life, have started out on careers where they expected to do certain things and found it was nothing like that. And it's today it's the same as before. In fact, it's probably worse today from the kids I know through my own kids than it was when I was younger.
I think you're right.
Because not many people went to university when I was young. When I went to university, I was one of 5% who went to university. Because now 50% go to university, and one questions why. And it's certainly not the right way to get people not everybody into good work.
Absolutely. I think that, especially in the last 20 years, there has been an incorrect emphasis on attending university, no matter what it is, rather than doing something, another qualification, sure, but doing something far more useful to you and indeed wider society and economy. But what are the plans for Rise for the coming year or so?
Well, plans for Rise in
the coming year or so.
In the coming years. We've had a year of what you might call consolidation, and that's worked well because that was the thing we talked about before. We thought we'd better not do too much too far. It's worked. We've had a good year. We are facing the opportunity of some other good work starting overseas. We don't intend to keep going overseas all the time, but at the same time, we've developed an excellent client relationship with a particular client in the UK, and that work which is repeat work and work that suits our style. And we hope we suit the client style. Is working very well. So I think the important thing is we're not going to spend all our life going overseas when there's good work in the UK. And if the government can bring themselves around to producing some extremely interesting projects for good people in the UK, we'll be onto that because that's what we'd like to do. Excellent. At the same time, we would always continue to try and do work overseas because we do learn by sharing cultural differences, work differences, etc., etc. And it gives some of our people a bit of fun to go overseas now and again.
Bob, thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you can come back along before long.
Okay. Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks for your help.
Goodbye.
Bye for now.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Bob, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Rise Management Consulting are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags, you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. But of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you president there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because, you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want. And I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians aren't interested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
So I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to kind of, you see their eyes going up and thinking, who? I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastic new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like they got in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials, they did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country? Well,
I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. And the hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to.
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it will be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it will be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle, those that have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Because thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the feathers to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.